The call came at 6:47 in the morning, just as Caleb Merritt was finishing his first pass along the belly seam of a Cessna 172 that a nervous flight school had dropped off the night before. His coffee sat on the workbench behind him, cold and forgotten. He had been running 2 fingers along the fuselage joint for several minutes, reading it the way his father had taught him, palm flat, pressure even, listening for what the metal wanted to say. He almost didn't answer. The number was Marcus Trans. Caleb hadn't spoken to Marcus in 14 months, not since the Great Lakes Connector chief pilot had sent a careful email congratulating him on opening his own shop. Caleb's hangar sat at the south end of Allegheny County Airport. 2 bays, a second-hand compressor, a used tap test kit that had belonged to his father, and a hand-painted sign above the door that read Merritt Aviation Consulting. He stared at the screen for 3 seconds, then he picked up. "They've grounded the whole fleet," Marcus said without greeting. His voice carried the flatness of a man who hadn't slept. "All 9 Q400s. Ground crew at Gate 17 found a hairline at the number 3 fairing joint during pre-flight. The airline is calling it structural. Allegheny Air Services is calling it cosmetic. The FAA is standing by, and we have $11.3 million in lease fees accruing while everybody points at each other." A pause. "I need someone who knows what he's looking at, Caleb. Not someone who needs 3 days to read the maintenance manual." Caleb was quiet. He pressed his palm flat against the Cessna's aluminum belly, the old habit, the reflex his father had put into him so early it felt like instinct. "I'll be there at 9, he said. He set the phone down and looked at the clock. It was 6:51. He had 47 minutes before Nora needed to be up for school. She was already awake when he came inside. 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in the particular stillness of a child who has just finished something she considers important. 6 small planes were drawn in the condensation on the kitchen window, each one slightly different from the last, each with the propeller at the nose and the engine mounted forward on the wing, not tail-mounted. Her stuffed rabbit, a brown lop-eared creature she had named Rivet, was propped against her cereal bowl at a precise angle she had arranged herself. "You're already dressed," Caleb said. "I knew you'd be going somewhere." She pointed at the window without looking up from her toast. "That one's a turboprop. The engine's in the front, on the wing." She looked at him then, the same level steadiness her mother had had, a quality he never remarked on and had never gotten used to. "Right?" "Right," he said. He made her toast. He watched her eat. He didn't say anything about the fleet, or about Allegheny Air Services, or about the man who had dismantled his career 5 years ago and who would be standing in that hangar when he arrived. Some things you carried quietly. He had learned that the weight didn't go away, but it became familiar, and familiar things were manageable. At 7:38 he dropped her at school. At 7:42 he turned the truck back toward the highway. Allegheny Air Services occupied a quarter-mile of ramp space on the north end of Pittsburgh International. 3 hangars and a parts warehouse the size of a city block. They were the largest MRO facility in the western Pennsylvania region. Maintenance, repair, and overhaul, the engine rooms of commercial aviation, the places where aircraft came every 6 to 8 years for the kind of inspection that stripped them to bare metal and rebuilt them from the inside out. Caleb had spent 8 years there. He'd left in a way that wasn't really leaving. He pulled into the employee lot at 9:04 in his 2009 F-150, with the dented rear panel he kept meaning to straighten. Warren Slate was already outside. Warren had grown into what he'd always been heading toward, thicker through the chest, silver at the temples, a facility access badge on a lanyard he wore, with the ease of someone who had learned to make credentials visible. He had the composed authority of a man who had spent years deciding how rooms should begin. When he saw Caleb climb out of the truck, something moved across his face, fast and controlled and then gone. He smiled. "Marcus," Warren said, as though Caleb were scenery, "I want to be honest with you. I'm not sure this is the right approach. We have our own structural team." Marcus Trans stood between them, a thin man with careful eyes who had learned over 22 years of aviation how to hold a room without raising his voice. "I'm aware of what you have, Warren. I'd still like a second look." Warren turned to Caleb then, the smile still in place. "Merritt, I heard you went independent." A brief pause that was not a pause. "How's that going?" Caleb had already turned toward the hangar door. Diana Rourke was on a phone call when they walked in. She was 44 years old, 6 months into the CEO position, recruited from a management consulting firm in Boston. She had been hired to modernize Allegheny's operational structure, and she was good at it. Data precise, quick with complex problems, comfortable with the kind of organizational turbulence that made other people freeze. What she had not yet acquired was a feel for the specific gravity of aircraft metal under thermal stress, or what it meant when a man with a worn jacket and a paint-marked knee walked into a room and didn't introduce himself. She ended her call. Her eyes moved from Marcus to Warren to Caleb. They paused on the canvas jacket, the boots, the work pants with a grease shadow on the left knee. The assessment lasted under 2 seconds. "Warren tells me we have a handle on this," she said. "Caleb would like to look at the aircraft first," Marcus said. Diana glanced at Warren. Warren gave a small, patient shrug. "I've already explained this, but if it'll put everyone at ease." "Of course," Diana said. "He's welcome to take a look." Caleb had already passed her. What most people do not know about composite repairs on aging turboprop airframes, and what Warren Slate was counting on no one knowing, begins with a substance called an adhesion promoter. The wing fairing panels on a Dash 8 Q400, the smooth coverings that protect the junction where wing meets fuselage, are composite layups, sheets of fiberglass or carbon fiber bonded with epoxy resin, shaped and cured, and fitted to tolerances measured in hundredths of a millimeter. When they crack or delaminate over years of weather and load cycling, the repair protocol requires, above all else, a step called surface preparation. The damaged area is sanded to an 80 grit profile, cleaned with solvent, and then treated with an adhesion promoter, a thin liquid compound that opens the composite surface at the molecular level, allowing the new epoxy to form a true chemical bond rather than sitting on top like paint on glass. The adhesion promoter requires 30 minutes of ambient cure time before epoxy can be applied, 30 minutes during which a condensation reaction between silane molecules and the composite substrate completes. Skip those 30 minutes, or shorten them to 8, and the reaction stops early. The bond that forms looks identical to a correct bond on visual inspection. Perfect, seamless to the touch. But subject it to Pittsburgh winters, to temperature swings between -12 and 43 degrees Fahrenheit, cycling 200 times in a single season, and the bond begins to fail inward. The surfaces pull apart in shear from the inside, millimeter by millimeter, invisibly. What results is what structural engineers call a kissing bond, a delamination so complete that the surfaces appear joined but share no actual adhesion between them. No strength, a ghost of a repair. The simplest way to find it is also the oldest. Caleb pulled a quarter from his jacket pocket, worn smooth from years of use, and began working the fairing joints on the first aircraft in line 3, moving forward to aft in 12-centimeter intervals. The tap test has been in use since the earliest composite aircraft. A firm strike on intact composite produces a sharp, high-pitched ring. Over a delamination, the same strike turns dull. A dead sound, like knocking on a door and finding nothing behind it. He worked in silence. Every 30 seconds or so, he uncapped a China marker and placed a small X. After 11 minutes, he had marked 7 panels across 3 aircraft. He crouched at the most advanced separation, pulled a loop from his breast pocket, and held it to the crack at the fairing seam. The fracture pattern told him what he had suspected from the moment Marcus described it on the phone. It was propagating from the bond line outward, not from surface fatigue, not from impact. From the adhesion interface, he stood, he looked at Warren. "What primer did your team use before the epoxy layup?" he said. Warren held his expression with great care. "Standard application per our documented repair method. FAA approved and in use for 3 years." He let the sentence settle. "The method is fully documented. I'd be happy to walk you through it, if that would help." Caleb looked at him for one moment. Then he turned to Diana Rourke, who was standing 8 feet away with the focused stillness of someone who has registered something unexpected and not yet decided what to do with it. "It's not structural failure," Caleb said. "The bond was never formed. Someone skipped the surface prep." He walked back toward the hangar entrance to write up his findings. He did not wait for a response. In his experience, the right answer didn't require defense. It just needed time. The institutional response arrived by 2 o'clock. Warren convened his engineering team. By the time the afternoon light angled through the hangar windows, they had produced a 42-page bound report. Pressure test data, cure time logs, photographic documentation at multiple magnifications. The conclusions were stated with precision. The repairs were within acceptable parameters. The cracking was consistent with normal composite aging in a high-cycle environment. Warren's team delivered the report to Diana, to the airline's legal counsel, and to the FAA's regional field office. At 2:23 p.m., Caleb received a call from Warren. His facility access had been revoked. "This is a certified maintenance environment," Warren said in the tone of someone who has rehearsed a sentence until it sounds procedurally neutral. "Independent contractors without current -8 heavy maintenance authorization aren't permitted to conduct structural inspections here. I'm sure you understand the liability considerations." Caleb said he understood, and hung up. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and watched a fuel truck work its way across the far apron. Then he called Lucas. Lucas Chen was 28 years old, 1 year out of aviation maintenance school, and possessed of a specific and undervalued skill, finding things that people had taken steps to make unfindable. "I need a patent search," Caleb said. "Composite repair method for turboprop airframe structures. Filing window 2017 to 2020. Inventor listing." Lucas was quiet a moment. "You think it's in there?" "I know it is," Caleb said. "I wrote it." The fourth aircraft failed the next morning. It was not one of the 7 panels Caleb had marked. It was the trailing edge port wing fairing on aircraft number 6 in the fleet, and the separation was visible from the ramp. A 1/4-inch gap opening at the seam like a slow, reluctant exhale. Ground crew found it at 6:09 a.m. By 6:32, the airline's director of operations had filed a mandatory safety report with the FAA. By 7:15, an airworthiness directive was being drafted that would suspend the entire fleet indefinitely, not just operationally but commercially, until an independent structural review was complete. $11.3 million in lease costs accruing. 47 daily flights suspended, 22 regional cities cut off from their connector service, passengers stranded in airports from Cleveland to Milwaukee. Warren Slate presented his remediation estimate to Diana at 9 a.m. sharp. Complete replacement of all suspect composite panels on all 9 aircraft. New materials, new labor, full redocumentation and recertification with the FAA. 6 weeks minimum, $4. Diana looked at that number for a long time. Then she asked her assistant to identify the FAA's designated engineering representative for the Great Lakes region. Dr. Patricia Okafor arrived that afternoon with 2 engineers and a methodology that was meticulous and unhurried. She ran the tap test on all 9 aircraft. She confirmed the 7 panels Caleb had marked. She found 11 more. She then requested the complete repair documentation going back to the original method development. Internal R&D records, the supplemental type certificate application history, the full cure log archive. That request was where Warren's 42 pages encountered something they had not been designed to survive. Lucas found it at 11:23 that night. U.S. Patent number 9847-2D31. Composite repair method for turboprop airframe structures on clay conditions. Filed May 20. Assigned to Allegheny Air Services, LLC. Inventor of record Warren R. Slate. But the supplemental type certificate application to the FAA, filed November 2018, 6 months before the patent, was public record. The FAA archived all STC documentation for traceability purposes, and attached to this application was an internal research memorandum, 3 pages, double-spaced, dated September 2017. At the top of the first page in the author field, C. Merritt, lead structural engineer, Allegheny Air Services. The methodology in the memo was identical to the patent. The epoxy compound, the surface preparation grit specification, the adhesion promoter compound, all the same, down to the cure temperature range and the maximum allowable humidity window during application, except for one line. In Caleb's original memo, Step 4 read, allow adhesion promoter to cure at ambient temperature for a minimum of 30 minutes before epoxy application. Verify cure completion with contact angle test before proceeding. In Warren's patent, Step 4 read, allow adhesion promoter to cure for 8 to 10 minutes or until tack-free to touch. 22 minutes removed from a 30-minute cure time, a number small enough to disappear inside a technical specification, large enough to hollow out the bond integrity across 42 fairing panels, 9 aircraft, and 2 Pittsburgh winters. Lucas sent the files to Caleb at 11:31 p.m. with a single text, "Found everything." Caleb read through it once, slowly. He set the laptop on the kitchen table and sat with it for a while. Upstairs, Nora was asleep with Rivet tucked under her arm, one ear folded down. The house was quiet. He thought about the 9 aircraft sitting dark and motionless on the Allegheny ramp tonight, grounded, cooling in the October air, leaking costs by the hour, and about the pilots who flew them and who had never done anything wrong and who were waiting for someone to tell them it was safe to go back. He went to the shelf by the back door where he kept his old work notebooks. The 2017 volume was third from the left. Dr. Okafor's team called Diana Rourke at 8:04 a.m. 2 days later. The call lasted 19 minutes. Afterward, Diana sat at her desk and read through 3 documents in sequence: the original 2017 STC research memorandum, Caleb's Allegheny Air Services personnel file pulled at her own request, and the side-by-side Step 4 comparison that Dr. Okafor had now formally attached to her independent review. The personnel file contained a photograph from an employee deed badge, 2018. Dark hair, direct eyes, the same unhurried expression. The man who had walked past her in a worn canvas jacket and said someone skipped the surface prep. She had looked at his jacket and decided what he was before he had said a word. She sat with that for a long time. Then she reached for the phone. The meeting convened at 2 p.m. Warren arrived with his legal team and his 42-page report. The tabs color-coded, the charts printed on heavy stock paper. He took the far end of the conference table with the settled authority of a man who has decided he still controls how this room is going to go. Caleb arrived alone with a worn canvas messenger bag. He set 3 items on the table: a USB drive, his original 2017 lab notebook in its battered spiral binding, and a single printed page. He sat at the side of the table without ceremony and waited. Warren presented first. He spoke for 12 minutes. Certification standards, industry practice, the operational realities of a compressed maintenance timeline, and the regulatory complexity of a full fleet overhaul. His voice was measured and professional, and he did not once look at Caleb. He did not once say the words patent or C. Merritt. When he finished, Caleb opened the notebook to September 14, 2017. He did not make a speech. He pointed to 3 things: the dated original methodology, the adhesion promoter step with the 30-minute minimum cure time, and the contact angle test he had specified to verify complete cure before epoxy application. Then he placed the single printed page beside the notebook, the Step 4 comparison, his words on the left, Warren's patent on the right. He pushed it to the center of the table. The room read it. It took about 90 seconds. The silence that followed was not the silence of neutrality. It had shape and weight and direction. "Warren," said Dr. Okafor, from the corner where she had been observing, "can you describe the technical basis for changing the minimum cure time from 30 minutes to 8 to 10? Warren looked at the comparison page. He looked at the notebook with its September 2017 date visible across the table. He looked at the version of this meeting he had prepared for, and it was not this one. He said nothing. "The 30-minute cure time isn't arbitrary," Caleb said. His voice was level, almost quiet. "It's the time required for the silane coupling agent in the adhesion promoter to complete its condensation reaction with the composite substrate. Below that threshold, the reaction is incomplete. The bond that forms is mechanical, not chemical. Under cyclic thermal loading Pittsburgh freeze-thaw conditions, a mechanical bond fails in shear, beginning at the bond line and propagating outward. That is exactly what happened to those 42 panels. 1 beat. The contact angle test takes 45 seconds. A drop of water on a correctly primed surface beads at under 10 degrees contact angle. On an undercured surface, it spreads flat. It would have caught every single one of these." Diana looked at the lab notebook. She turned a page, then another. The handwriting was dense and careful. Entries dated in sequence from March through November 2017. She looked up at Caleb. She started to say something. She stopped. She looked at Warren instead. "Pull every adhesion promoter cure time entry in the production logs for these 9 aircraft, she said to her assistant. "Time spent on this table in 20 minutes. The logs arrived in 17. Diana reviewed them without speaking. A column of single digits, 8 minutes 978, ran down the page where 30 should have appeared. She set the document down. She excused Warren from the room. He did not look at Caleb as he stood. His face held the particular expression of a man who has refused, even now, to understand that the accounting has finally arrived. He carried the box from his office himself. He was gone before 5 o'clock. The investigations moved at different speeds. Warren Slate's termination was immediate. The patent dispute took 4 months, with intellectual property attorneys on both sides and a USPTO correction application that eventually produced a reissued patent with a single line changed under inventor of record, Caleb Merritt. The aircraft took 11 days. The correct surface preparation protocol, the one Caleb had written in September 2017, was applied to all flagged panels under Dr. Okafor's direct oversight. Adhesion promoter applied, 30 minutes. Contact angle test performed and logged for every single panel before application, cure cycle complete. Dr. Okafor signed the airworthiness documentation herself. Materials cost per aircraft, $3 9 aircraft, $2,940. $4.2 million against $2,940. The distance between those two numbers was not in the engineering. It had never been in the engineering. It was in a decision someone had made in a production scheduling meeting about 22 minutes, and whether anyone with the knowledge to notice would ever be in a position to say something. Someone had been. He had said it in 2 sentences, in a hangar, in a worn jacket, and been walked to the parking lot before lunch. The remediation contract lasted 3 months. Caleb worked alongside Allegheny's structural team, walking the younger technicians through the cure protocol from the beginning, not just the steps but the reasons behind each one. He showed them the contact angle test and what to watch for. He answered every question with the reason, not just the rule. Diana came into the hangar twice to observe. She brought coffee the second time, 2 cups. Without asking how he took it, he drank it black. On the last day, she walked out to the ramp with him while he packed his kit. "I'd like to offer you a standing consulting arrangement," she said. "Quarterly retainer. Structural review on all major MRO work going forward." He looked out at the apron. One of the 9 Q400s was taxiing at the far end, its Pratt & Whitney turboprop spinning up, the harmonic drone rising across the concrete and settling as the aircraft turned onto the taxiway. He watched it until it turned the corner. "All right," he said. Not because she had offered. Because the aircraft needed to be looked at by someone who understood what they were looking at, and because the people on board that plane disappearing toward the runway had never done anything to deserve the alternative. He picked Nora up at 3:40 that afternoon, the same as always. She came out of the school doors in her coat with the hood half on, backpack bouncing. She climbed into the passenger seat, buckled herself with the focused efficiency she applied to important tasks, and held up her left hand. On the back of it, in blue marker, she had drawn a small airplane. The engine was on the wing. The propeller lines were carefully angled. She had gotten the nacelle shape almost exactly right. "Is it right?" she asked. He studied it with the same attention he gave to aircraft. He tilted her hand slightly to check the propeller pitch marks she had drawn. "Airworthy," he said. That night, after dinner, after reading, after rivet had been arranged at the correct angle beside her pillow, with the seriousness she gave to important procedures, she appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas. "Daddy," she said, "are all the planes fixed?" "Yeah," he said, "they're fixed." She thought about this for a moment, the particular 7-year-old gravity that weighs things without rushing, that does not perform certainty but arrives at it slowly and keeps it. "Good," she said. She went back to bed. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold again and his notebook open in front of him, and outside the window the Pittsburgh night was quiet in the specific way it gets after something has finally been set right. Not celebrated, not announced. Just correct. Just finally quietly the way it should have been all along. I keep returning to the 30 minutes. Not the $2 million. Not the patent. Not even the confrontation in the conference room. Just those 30 minutes, the specific, documented, chemically necessary 30 minutes that someone decided could be reduced to 8 without consequence, on the reasonable assumption that no one with enough knowledge to disagree would ever be standing close enough to the aircraft to notice. That assumption lasted 3 years. It held across 2 winters and 42 panels and $11.3 million in grounded lease costs. It held until a man in a worn jacket pressed a quarter to a fairing seam and the sound told him everything. I think about the places in our own lives where we're running 8-minute versions of 30-minute things, where we've handed authority to people who have the title but not the understanding, where the person who actually developed the method is standing right there, and we look at their jacket instead of their hands. Have you ever been dismissed before you said a word, categorized by something visible before you had a chance to show what you actually knew? I'd genuinely like to hear about it in the comments below. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, aircraft operators, and events are products of the imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, companies, or incidents is coincidental. The story is intended for entertainment and reflection. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you never miss one. Share it with someone who's been underestimated, someone doing the real work quietly, in a hangar, in a workshop, in a back office somewhere. It costs nothing to watch. Sometimes it means exactly the right thing to exactly the right person.